Good afternoon. How are you all feeling? Did you get at least something to snack on? All right. And water, are you getting enough water? If you think you are, please drink even more water. It's stunning how dehydrated you get, not just in these buildings, but your brain, you're mostly made of water, and your brain is just going, right? So if you're feeling a little bit mushy, drink a glass of water, okay? That's your growth strategist talking to you. My name is Reverend Tandi Rogers, and I am your growth strategist for the association, and I am so happy to be co-presenting with Reverend Stefan Jonasson, who is the head of the department. And a lot of people, growth office, my goodness, what does that not include, right? So what does the office do? We kind of think of somebody else named it. Somebody named us the brain trust of the UUA. I'm like, oh dear. But really, that is kind of what we do. So get this, we're paid to watch trends and crunch data and find the stories within the data. And we make recommendations or we make reports with recommendations to the board of directors and the leadership council. So some of the stats that you heard during the first session actually came from our office. And it was so satisfying to see, here's what our job is. Here are some of the numbers we're seeing and the trends we're seeing, and then have the board do their work. And then we wait for them to volley it back to us so that we can pick it up and do our work again. We each have different initiatives or different focuses that we're also involved in. Of course, if you're from a large congregation, you would really know Stefan Jonasson because he shepherds and coaches the large congregations. I've got a foot also in congregational life where I came from. I was on district staff for 10 years, and I help gather and coordinate congregational life staff around multi-sites. That's going to be our next big boom. I know it. So just kind of tuck that away. And emerging congregations, the planting of brand new religious covenanted communities, whatever those are going to end up looking like. Today's presentation, actually, the slides are packed with information, and I want to give thanks to Stefan for creating the slides. I've been a little busy right before GA. I thought it was a really good idea to get married. Thank you. And so if I zone out a little bit on some of the slides, what I'm probably thinking is, wouldn't they rather like to see my wedding pictures? Which are not part of the slides, so don't worry about that. Right? Woohoo! But where the slides came from, where the information that we're about to give you came from is Stefan and I, our staff meetings probably don't look like typical staff meetings. I will send him little notes as to what I'm doing. I'm kind of a little busy bee doing stuff, and I'll send him notes as to what I'm doing, and he sends me notes what he's doing. But when we gather weekly, we'll talk for 90 minutes to 2 hours via Skype. He's in Winnipeg. I'm usually in Tacoma, Washington, sometimes in Boston. And grok that for a minute. The head of your growth office for the UUA in the USA is in Canada, another country. That's how much he loves you, okay? In our faith, the Unitarian Universalism. But when we talk, we use Skype, and I have finally learned in our third year together to press record. Because, and a lot of you know this, Stefan is one of our great minds. He is a walking encyclopedia. I learn so much from him, and he knows this now. Sometimes I'll come to him with a provocative question that I could probably answer myself, but I want to see him kind of go off like he does. And will it be a staff meeting? And he will just rise up and preach, and then he will, conjure up the ancestors and tell me stories about Hosea Ballou and all sorts of stuff. It's fabulous. So I'm hoping that you'll be able to experience some of that today. And so we're going to volley back and forth like we do. So you'll get to see kind of what we are in a staff meeting. The title came from, it was almost about numbers, when everything you thought you knew isn't enough. And we want to acknowledge that we are culturally on this cusp of modernity, of knowing the numbers. Quantitative is a technical fix, you can know it, and that postmodern of hyper-relationality, and rather being learned, being learning. And what I love about Stefan and I is he's very traditional. I don't know if you know this about him. And while I'm very traditional, I've got a house full of teenagers. which kind of keep me honest. And so Stefan and I we love each other very much. And so we hold this very sweet balance, knowing that it's not an either or. It's not modern versus postmodern. It's a symbiotic relationship. And so we're in this beautiful opportunity of what's transient, what's permanent. What do we need to know? I want to tell you one quick story, and then I'm going to hand it over to Stefan, as I'm prone to do. And you'll see us poking at each other, because we can both, if you spent any time with either of us, we could go off on tangents and stories for a long time. So I get questions all the time, people calling me up saying, this is one of the most recent ones, I need the budgets for all the breakthrough congregations. Like, what? What are you going to do with them? What do you need this information for? Which is always a good question to ask when somebody comes up, particularly with a numbers-related question. Because what I find is that's not really what they were, right? It's not really what they were asking. So I asked them, so what do you want to do with the data? I could gather that, but what do you want to do with it? And he goes, well, I just know that if I presented that information to our congregation at the next board meeting, they would want to be breakthrough congregations, get out their checkbooks, and be as generous as the breakthrough congregations. Huh. Well, you're going at it as a technical fix, but I don't think that's going to happen. Do you think that would happen? That would really happen? No. So I said, so what was at the core? And so we talked for a little bit. I listened to the story. I listened to the concerns. And it really wasn't about numbers. It's about relationship and about mission. And so I suggested one little fix, and you can try this at home. I've seen it work in other congregations. I said, why don't you invest in a big screen, a projector, and a couple digital cameras? In fact, you probably don't even need digital cameras. Find people in your congregation with smartphones and take pictures of people living out your mission throughout the week, and then on Sunday show slideshows of people throughout the week living out your mission. And let's say Edith is hosting the circle suppers. Have Edith's name with the circle suppers and when they're meeting and how to contact, all that information. Oh, and if you need pastoral care, here's the picture of the person to contact and their information, and see what happens. So then I checked in with the person a couple months later, and lo and behold, he doesn't have the numbers yet, but what he reported is that there is a fervor, there is a relational, there is an I see you. And see, that was a creative, adaptive fix for what looked like a technical fix. So we're in a time of asking that, is this really what I'm asking and yearning for? And how does our faith bring me back to an answer, that hyper-relational I see you? Stefan.
It really is grand to work with Tandi, and if to the extent that we may well be the brain trust, Tandi's the part of the brain trust that pays dividends. And I kind of like to think that maybe I'm just kind of a stable part of the portfolio. We live in interesting times. I've been at the association long enough that the association used to be able to serve its congregations at events like this and in other contexts by showing up to tell you what we know. And so we were able to dispense wisdom and good advice, an abundance of technical fixes for congregations, and we earned our keep that way. What we're really learning is what we don't know. And we are moving into a landscape that is frankly radically experimental, and there's nothing we can do about it. The people who can speak with you with great confidence about what we need to do are more often than not almost certainly wrong. Sometimes they'll be right. And the truth is that mostly we are going to have to blunder our way through new times together, focused as best we can on what our compelling mission is and what we are called to be in the world. And it's going to require, and I'm saying this as a humanist, it's going to require faith. We actually We need to move forward with faith that what we have to give to the world is in and of itself worthwhile, and that our challenge is to figure out strategies for how to offer that gift to the world, and trust that we will at least inch forward if we don't always storm forward in making change in the world we love with this spiritual tradition that we love. So in the past, we shared best practices, we talked about how to grow our faith, but we find ourselves in this rapidly changing landscape, and what we thought we knew is no longer sufficient. If you're still operating on the UUA's pamphlet from about 1984 that gave you 101 good ideas for growth, those were good ideas for growth in 1984, and most of them aren't going to do it for you anymore. You may see glimmers in them about what we're called to do today, but the technologies have changed, the environment has changed, and we need to adapt to it. And so here's some assumptions that we're bringing to you. We don't know for sure what we're doing. And we are going to stand up in front of you and model not knowing what to do for you so that you can take a little humility back with you to your congregations and not know what to do there as well. And if we can all not know what to do together, we are actually more likely to make progress than if our congregations continue to dwell in the illusion that some of the members know exactly what to do, and if we just fall into place lockstep, we'll be able to grow our congregations. We're going to need to figure this out together. I do want to say, though, having said that we don't know for sure what we're doing, I think we do know for sure that human needs, including spiritual needs, haven't changed much over the past generation. Now, I've modified this through conversations with Tandi because I used to say over the past 30,000 years, but that seemed immodest. So just give us the past generation. Human spiritual needs haven't changed as much as human spiritual behaviors have. But the tools that we have to meet those needs now have to change almost yearly. None of your congregations had Facebook pages a decade ago. I can tell you that several of them didn't have Facebook pages 2 years ago, and it's now an indispensable part of the technology for how we share the good news of Unitarian Universalism. We can extend that one illustration into almost every aspect of congregational life and discover that there are analogous circumstances or changes that we're contending with. The other thing that I think we can say for certain is that community still matters, that there is a deep need for community. I think one of the great truths that President Peter Morales has been talking about for a decade now is the truth of the real crisis of isolation that exists in American society. Here we are with the greatest tools of connection, not just wired together, but wirelessly together. We have the best means of communication ever known to humankind in terms of technological assistance to be able to be in relationship with one another. And yet Americans self-report that they are the loneliest generation in the loneliest society in the whole of human history. Community still matters. But how communities form and how they maintain themselves is changing. And we need to learn to be able to differentiate between what it is that we have to offer, what it is that's abiding, and what it is that's continually changing. And so we need to understand that community is the water, and we need not to confuse the way that water flows to us with our need for that water, with our hunger, our thirst for that water. So there was a time when we could scoop it up just from the stream. Well, we don't do that anymore. And there was a time when we would pull it up with a bucket from a well in our neighborhood. We don't do that anymore either. There was a time that it just flowed through the pipes, and that was our main access to the water supply. Now we can buy it in bottles, no matter how much we may hate that. We find our supply in various ways, and a similar reality exists in congregational life. So the situation is changing, but there are health signs out there. So, Unitarian Universalist congregations, while some decline each year, some are plateaued, nearly a third of our congregations continue to grow. We are actually in an enviable position. Tandi and I just did an analysis of how our association compares with other fairly liberal and mainline denominational bodies. And we are actually continuing to hold strong. We have some congregations that are declining, some that are increasing, some that are plateaued, but we actually continue to significantly outperform the curve of every other major liberal, religious, or mainline denomination in America. And, well, we can be happy for that, and it's a challenge, because we can't count on that happening in perpetuity. And in fairness, we are something of a boutique denomination among department stores. And so we shouldn't become immodest about what we are able to do, but we actually should take some pride and some encouragement from our success overall. And what would be unforgivable would be for us to ever fall into despair about our circumstance. The prospects for Unitarian Universalism are good. The field in which we're operating remains fertile, and we need not be afraid of the changes in the religious landscape. In fact, they are tilting in our favor. A second observation that I would make is that our growth is more even across regions than any other denominational body. This came as a surprise to us because some of you, well, we're in New England here, aren't we? Some of you may have heard a myth, a fabrication actually, some might even call it a lie, about our inevitable decline in this part of the country and our growth prospects in other parts of the country. Well, as it happens, our regions are all pretty close together in terms of how well they're doing. And that tells us that, in fact, we can grow Unitarian Universalism anywhere and everywhere. There is no destiny involved in your geographic location. We can grow vibrant, fresh, new congregations in New England, and we can revitalize congregations that already exist. And we can grow similarly fresh and vibrant congregations and revitalize existing ones in every region of this country. And so we need to give up the old story that there are regional differences in our growth capacity. It's simply not true. The third observation I would make in terms of healthy signs is that our growth in worship attendance, this is different than membership. You probably have been obsessed over the years about counting your membership numbers, and that's a good Methodist behavior, and I'd like to encourage you to continue it. Not as an obsession, but just as a good spiritual practice in your congregation. It matters what we count. We measure what matters to us, and it's important to maintain good statistics. But the most important numbers that Tandi and I and that other congregational consultants work with don't usually include the membership number. We look at attendance and we look at money. Those are the two measures of a congregation's real vital signs. And while the legal membership is important, especially if you happen to be, changing your real estate or moving or applying for a loan, what we see that marks health is actually the attendance number. Well, as it happens, Unitarian Universalist attendance growth outpaces that of the evangelical traditions proportionate to our size. Again, we're a boutique in this larger landscape of retail religion, but we're doing well as a boutique, and more people are coming to our congregations than we realize. Next set of healthy signs, Tandi. One of the things that we've learned from studying congregations is that congregations with strong leadership rotation are growing. By this, I don't mean that we push people out of leadership positions, but rather that people don't stay in the exact same leadership positions forever. Several years ago, the little congregation that I served on the Canadian prairies as sort of a hobby for 29 years, we had a board member who was coming up to his 50th anniversary as a member of the board. And I asked then President John Burens if he would send a letter of greetings. And John called me on the phone before writing a letter, and he said, I'd be happy to send a letter of congratulations, but can you tell me, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And I was able to assure him that in that particular case, it had been a good thing. But the fact that it was a good thing was really unusual. Typically, that would be a dreadful thing in the life of a congregation. What we see is that those congregations who help their leading members find new opportunities to serve in the congregation while vacating the places that they have served, and who do so in a systematic and relatively frequent way, discover that they create the fluidity in the system that helps them to grow. And so leadership rotation, we discerned, was a very important fact in congregational vitality. We've also discovered that our appeal across educational categories is broadening. Now, for those of you who it's not immediately obvious what that means, let me say we have more high school graduates and high school dropouts in our congregations than we have had in half a century, and I want to tell you that that's actually a good thing. We are no longer destined as a movement to be the graduate school at prayer. There's nothing wrong with having a graduate degree. I have one of my own. And I worked hard for it. But we had become a pretty exclusive community educationally. We had the narrowest spectrum of educational attainment of any major denomination in America. And we have finally reached the stage where that is starting to change. And finally, our congregations are becoming much more diverse than they were in the past. We haven't exactly reached the tipping point, but I'm convinced we're actually finally racing towards it rather than sauntering.
Yes. Somebody was just cheering that on. Feel free to cheer things on and say amen. When Stefan and I first came on 3 years ago as part of the office, and I also want to explain a little bit how we came to be so that you might want to replicate this. Teresa Cooley and Peter Morales had the vision of having a growth office to just focus on growth and a brain trust. And rather than doing a job search or that kind of search, people search, I need more coffee, they thought about who would be a dynamic team to spark off of each other and take us in a new way. And Stefan and I had been serving on the congregational life staff. And we would be the ones, whenever there was like a big meeting with all congregational life staff, we would be the ones in the corner plotting, if we were ever in charge, this is what we would do, kind of things. And all sorts of just nuttiness and having so much fun with our big, hairy ideas. And Teresa took notice of that, and she and Peter said, we want to open up an office, but only with you two. Would you consider? And we've had a blast ever since. So think about that also. I know so many of our congregations open it up and say, anybody, y'all volunteer. When it's something big that deals with prophecy and projections and mission and things like that, who are the sparky people that might be a little bit different and a little bit at the core of the same, and what would happen if you brought together people to take that on and gave them permission to run with it? So one of the things that we did is so it's not just your growth that we're invested in, the growth of our faith tradition and the impact in the world. We're invested in the growth of the congregations and other manifestations of covenanted UU community. We were also invested in the growth of the staff, the organizational maturity, and the spiritual vitality of the people who serve you, your UUA staff. Are there any in the room? Because we're about to talk about you. Okay. So I don't know if you've heard, our story of having silos at headquarters or not. And I don't know if you all experience silos where perhaps your religious education committee may not talk so much with the worship committee, even though that there's an incredible opportunity there. Well, there was a little bit of that going on. So we thought, what would happen if we turned the organization into a learning community, a learning entity? And so we figured out something that they could all learn together. And we took on John Roberto's trainings, hook, line, and sinker, Faith Formation 2020, also known as Faith Formation for the 21st Century. And I started brokering, like a Yenta, started brokering people from different staff groups to go to those trainings together in a different city and learn something together, and then they'd cross-fertilize. And I'm watching now, I did collect stats for a while, that continued learning keeps going. And then so somebody in the IT department, information technology department, might have gone to a training with the faith development department, and then somebody from stewardship. Well, lo and behold, they're finding ways and reasons to work together. So think of that as your learning. If you want change to happen, become a learning community. Find something to go. Honestly, I don't think it even really matters what you go learn. You could find something really good, but go get out to other congregations and learn. Okay. So what we did is Stefan and I went to headquarters and wanted to collect some data just to get a baseline of where we were. And we asked 3 big questions. The first question was just, how does what you do help growth? Now, Chris Walton has given me permission to share this with you. We went to Chris Walton, who is the editor of the UU World, which is like the one thing that every Unitarian Universalist gets. And I asked Chris Walton, I said, so what is what you do, how does that help growth? How does that aid growth? And he looked at me blankly and he said, Tandi, I'm a journalist. I'm like, okay. And how does that help with growth? I have a ton of ideas how the UU World helps growth. And he's like, it's a journal. It doesn't really. I'm like, oh my God, you're breaking my heart. I wanted to cry. I'm like, Chris, dude, your platform is the one thing that we all share. It has to do with faith formation, faith identity. And then the big boom idea happened of what if we took the breakthrough congregation model rather than having it just at GA where only you all really saw it. What if we put that in the UU World so everybody could see it? And do you remember that moment? He lit up and then he got tears in his eyes. He goes, okay, I'm on board. What do we need to do? And I don't know if you've noticed in the UU World, but in the last 3 years, there's a lot more graphs, articles about growth, all this. So I want to plant that seed that sometimes that growth catalyst in your congregations may not understand just how important they are. So find those partners to help them see and get sparky. The next question we asked was it this one? Yeah, it was, because there was 3 questions. Okay, I'll give you the very last question, and then we're going to jump on this. The last question we asked was, if you were a Unitarian Universalist religious entrepreneur, how would you invest? Oh, thank you. Isn't that a sparky question? So think about that. You're a UU entrepreneur. How would you invest in your zip code? And notice I don't say just in your congregation, because our faith is so much bigger than a brick and mortar building. Okay? That was also really juicy for people, and it shifted. We started shifting it and getting more permission giving with maybe glow-in-the-dark tattoos is a great investment. right? I mean, that kind of gave me permission. I'm like, if I were an entrepreneur, I would get glow-in-the-dark tattoos. And then when I bought them, somebody from finance called and said, what are you spending money on? What does this have to do with growth? And I gave her a tattoo, and I said, go put the glow-in-the-dark tattoo on, wear it around in public, come back and tell me what happens. And it wasn't just the invitation out to people. It was, oh my gosh, I have to practice. What does Unitarian Universalism mean? I've got to explain this to people. And that's where the magic was. Okay. The big question that I want to share with you, that's on the slide, is what 3 things, if your congregation stopped doing, would contribute to growth? You know, when we asked that to staff, overwhelmingly, they said, the staff meetings drive us nuts. Right? We've got work to do. And to stop and there were a lot of staff meetings and committee meetings. And I let the leadership council know, and bless them, on a dime, they said, all right, we're doing it different. And then the rest of the staff got to see that and hear it, that what they said matters. And that we shifted. So be careful when you ask that question. You have to be ready to then let go and go somewhere else. That letting go of control, or letting go of how it's going to end up. When we surrender, I feel it over and over again, that when we surrender and trust each other, that just goodness happens. Okay, so think about that. What 3 things, if you stopped doing in your congregation, would actually lead to growth? And I'm hereby giving you permission to stop doing them and feel it. And you're going to disappoint people too. I just want to warn you when you do this. Don't come back to me and go, oh, Tandi, you led me down a really bad path. People were ticked off. People will be ticked off. And they're going to miss some of whatever it was that you said. Now, here's a strategy. If it's something really big, then you might want to make a list of who's going to be disappointed and then strategically disappoint them. Let them know ahead of time. I know this is important to you. We're going to do it differently. And if it was really, really important, we might come back and keep doing it, or we might not. But I just want you to know, I see it, I know it. Okay. Oh, do I do the 3 things? All right. So when Stefan and I did this for kind of our global overall, bless him. I was a former teacher, so I'm just full of these little exercises, and he just plays right along with me. Thank you, Stefan. So when we did this, we looked globally at what are the 3 things that we need to leave behind to stop doing or saying or attaching to. The certitude that we have the one right way of expressing Unitarian Universalism, or the one right way to organize ourselves, or that we know what the landscape is, and boy, we have the answer. If we just invite the nuns, they're going to come. Well, it's a little more complicated than that. So the necessary fixes are not always technical. An adaptive fix, that taking a culture, here's the culture, here's where you want it to be, how do we get there? It's not going to be a checklist. It's not going to be 100 things you can do and then it's magically going to happen. It's often, what do we need to learn? Who do we need to partner with? What do we need to let go of? We also often need to leave behind the story. That horrible story, I don't even want to say it, but certain regions don't grow, things like that. We need to let that go. Let it go. And I love the Byron Katie work of when you have a story and you're wrestling with it, asking, is it really true? Let me try on. Who would I be if it weren't true? Isn't that a lovely question? Who would I be if I just let that story go? And then what is the story I'm really called to live into? Because if we're to embrace a different story, if we're to embrace our aspirations, we need to let go of the barriers, the old stories that keep us stuck. We also need to let go of the notion that we create our mission, because our mission is usually the thing that owns us. It's not comfortable. It's messy. It will require that we experiment, and it will bring us into wholeness.
Among the other things we need to let go is the notion that demographics are destiny. I mean, we do believe this somewhere deep in our bones, that if only we can find that delicate balancing act of alignment, the demographics will carry us forward. So we explain away our decline because our congregation is located in a community that is slowly declining in population, or it's aging in population, or it's suddenly become younger. And, well, those people just aren't interested in church, or so we believe. And so often we actually utilize demographic comparisons to give ourselves permission to fail. Now, I think we can give ourselves permission to fail if we're willing to take risks, that we should give ourselves that kind of permission, but we actually shouldn't look to the statistics, to comparing our steeple to the next congregation's steeple, in order to justify where it is that we are. We can actually grow our communities wherever we are, in whatever circumstance we find ourselves, provided that we understand what our mission is, where again it's understood as something that's thrust upon us rather than necessarily something that we can sit down and articulate as poetry by committee, an act that rarely works very well for us. But if we understand that our mission tends to be handed to us, and that we will know what our mission is if we understand what the core values of our faith are and are aware of our immediate context. Our strategy in most communities, from the end of the Second World War until into the 1970s, was to abandon neighborhoods that weren't giving us people like us already in order to evangelize. And so we would move to new neighborhoods. It was a strategy that was frankly numerically effective, and it's a strategy that isn't going to work in the current environment. What we need to understand is that if our neighborhood is changing, we have actually been handed a new mission to figure out how to make Unitarian Universalist principles relevant to the people who are moving into that neighborhood. So if our community appears to be declining, it's probably only declining because it no longer seems to be people like us. That is to say, people like the folks we know on Sunday morning already. That's not a license to leave. That's a challenge to figure out how to be in relationship with those who are moving into the neighborhood. Demographics is not destiny. We can grow and prosper anywhere because our principles really are universal. They really are life-giving. They really are vital. And our task in the world is to figure out how to share them wherever we happen to be. Another thing we need to leave behind is the notion that we somehow come from a singular social class. Now, sometimes we express this as a kind of joke upon ourselves, so we make light of ourselves as fairly privileged people and we talk about the foibles we have as relatively privileged people. But the truth of the matter is that universalism can appeal to the whole swath of community. Almost 30 years ago, we learned that one really strong demographic correlation was that Unitarian Universalists were likely to listen to National Public Radio. This doesn't work for public television, by the way. It works for radio, which, kind of dates it a little bit. But we understood that more than income, more than educational level, more than any other factor, it appeared that the strongest correlation was between the expressions, I am a Unitarian Universalist, and I listen to National Public Radio. Okay? Well, I'm actually getting to a point here, so don't worry, I haven't strayed from the bullet point. In 1993, I began conducting an experiment. And the experiment is revealed on my expense account receipts, because every time that I took a taxi and got a receipt, I would note whether or not the radio in the taxi was tuned to National Public Radio. We have an established correlation. And what I can tell you from my direct experience is that 21% of the taxi radios in taxis that I have taken since 1993, that's how many years? 21, have been tuned to National Public Radio, which begs the question, where are the taxi drivers in Unitarian Universalist congregations? Our appeal is not to a singular social class, and we need to learn how to share our message across the class divide. Forget class warfare. We're suffering simply from class abandonment and indifference. The last observation I would make here is the assumption that we can only appeal to the formally educated. I know all sorts of smart people who have never been to university. And as a former university lecturer, I've known all sorts of university-educated people who fell short. I was at First Church in Boston a Sunday ago, and I loved the tagline on their order of service. First Church in Boston professes to be the place where love and wisdom meet. Wisdom is found across educational levels. I actually think pursuing wisdom is central to the Unitarian Universalist search for truth and meaning, and we need to learn to recognize wisdom rather than simply formal education when we see it.
I'm going to jump bullets here, no great surprise. And can you understand now why I love working with Stefan? He pulls out these wild stats, and sometimes I'll say, where did you get that? That can't be true. And then, it's on his receipts.
Check my expense account.
I know. Love you. Okay, so how many of you have heard the notion, the assumption, the story that we are a sanctuary for the religiously wounded, that people who come from other religions, we provide that sanctuary, and yes, our congregations are full of them, and full of us, I should say. I'm a convert from another religion. And then we even have a curriculum, a wonderful curriculum that's been updated, that if you come from another religion, then this can be part of your membership journey to figure out, do the discernment, what do you want to leave at the door, and what do you want to bring in to the faith. It's called Owning Your Religious Past. I highly recommend it. Now, here's the thing, though. One of our leaks is with our youth and young adults. Now, we raised our youth and young adults. We raised our youth and young adults with curriculum like Neighboring Faiths, where they go out and they learn about all the different faiths, and then in turn learn about what does it mean to me as a Unitarian Universalist? What are the differences? What are the differences and what are the similarities with Judaism or Hinduism or these? So that our youth and young adults, more often than not, have great respect for other religions. And they have very little tolerance for the hyphenated Unitarian Universalism. And I know because my teen has checked me. I love to say I was a humanist Unitarian Universalist or a blah, 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 blah. And my son Owen looked at me and said, Mom, do you not have big faith in our tradition? Like, what are you talking about? And he goes, we're big enough. You don't need to hyphenate. Right? And there's a piece of that. Our congregations are actually, could be, if you look around, the young adults that are there that we've raised love our faith. They're not wounded. They're not the walking wounded. Why don't we put them in leadership and see what happens? Okay? Yes. There's another piece of it. I've done youth ministry for years, and it's to keep me accountable. I just want them to take over, please. Soon. The opportunities that they have in school, the opportunities they have in all their different paths, they have so many leadership skills that are offered throughout the world, and they're hooked in a different way. And so please let go of that old story that we who come from somewhere else that we have the one right way. There are so many different ways. So that's something that we really need to let go of. That woundedness, we don't have to hold that up higher than our spiritual health. The other piece that I really want to hold up is that we're marginalized somehow. We might be boutique-y, but and I understand that there are places where we are in conservative areas, but I guarantee that there are people in other communities. How many of you come from a rural area or a more isolated area? Thank you for doing the ministry that you do. And I guarantee that there are people from even the conservative congregations who are so glad that you were there in being a beacon for progressive thought, particularly around gay rights. I worked, before I was congregational life staff, I was what's it called when you raise money? Fund developer. Oh my God, I need more coffee. Stewardship, yes, that's what I did. Fund developer. And program, whatever. I raised money for this ecumenical agency. Wow, it's taped. I'm so sorry back home. Okay, and when I joined the staff, I was also really out. I was out as a humanist Unitarian Universalist before Owen checked me, and I was very out as being queer. And, I could have the freedom because I was the one raising millions of dollars for the agency, so what are they going to do? Make me feel bad? No, they want me to keep raising money. I knew that. But when it was time for me to leave, it was the Mormon board members who came to me and thanked me so much for being on staff and being out with who I am because they have a gay son. And it made them feel good that somewhere in the world there was that beacon of wholeness, of a universalism, and they wanted that so badly for their institution. The man, John Roberto, that I mentioned, who does the Faith Formation 2020, he's Catholic and would do anything for the Unitarian Universalists. We've taken so many of his trainings. And he offered to do trainings for us for free. And I'm like, John, you were a busy person. Why on earth would you offer that up to the Unitarian Universalist of all? We aren't even Christian, technically. And he said, Tandi, your faith goes where my Jesus calls us to go, but my beloved institution cannot yet. I will go and support you in any way I can. So can we get off of our marginalization? The world needs us. If your ecumenical agency won't let you be a partner at the table, get over the associate status. There's just too much work to do. But if they won't let you, then you go grab other partners and go do that work. We are the people of power and big faith, and there's a wide universalism bubbling up all over. Our job is to find out how to be in partnership with that universalism.
And the last two things we need to get to just leave behind, the things we need to pretend we stop knowing, that we know so well, that we just need to stop doing that, both of which break my heart, particularly the first one, because I have spent most of the last quarter century advising Unitarian Universalist congregations on governance. If you type in the word governance at the UUA website, my picture is going to come up in one of the first 2 or 3 hits. I have had some weeks where I have had as many as 100 inquiries from UU congregations about governance. So this breaks my heart. But we need to get over our obsession with governance and organizational structures. I have arrived at the conclusion that too often we do governance renovation in order to avoid the harder work of spiritual discernment and engagement with the community. In other words, we do governance work to keep our systems stuck where they are rather than to help them move forward. Now, I love good governance, and I like to think that I know it when I see it. And I don't see it as much as you'd think in our congregations. But, just as demographics isn't destiny, governance isn't destiny either. I have seen congregations with pretty mediocre to almost downright lousy governance structures, but if they are populated primarily by emotionally mature people who are concerned about being together in covenanted community, they'll do just fine. And similarly, I've seen congregations with the most polished and refined governance papers imaginable where the train goes off the rail 3 times a week. So a healthy attention to governance and organizational structures is a good thing, but an obsession about it, an obsession that gives us permission to actually not do the important spiritual work and community engagement that we are called to do is not a good thing, and we've just got to stop with that focus. And finally, we need to overcome our aversion to risk-taking and public learning. I got stopped by the police on my way to church a couple of decades ago when I was mostly doing governance work. I was doing 118 in 100 zone. Now, remember, I'm from Her Majesty's Dominions, so that's not as bad as it sounds. But 118 in 100 zone is actually enough to get you a ticket from the police. And at the time, I was wearing a little badge that paraphrased Martin Luther. I bought it from the Arlington Street Button Man, in fact, in Boston. It said simply, "Sin boldly." Okay? Now, I was on my way to church. My robes were hanging in the back seat. I was pretty confident that I was going to get a pass. Instead, I had to text the church to tell them I'd be late for church. And I waited for my ticket. And on the way out, he tapped on my badge and he said, "That's good advice, but next time don't sin in this area above 107. To take Luther one step further, I want to encourage you to fail boldly. There is no police officer out there to stop you and give you a ticket for taking a risk and failing. We need to be willing to fail more frequently, more robustly, more gloriously in our congregations. The test of our wisdom and the test of our health is if we can figure out how not to fail in exactly the same way several times in a row. But we do need to be willing to take some unimaginable risks. You know, it's unfortunate that we call our worship places sanctuaries in most of our congregations because that has become too often how we behave. We let them be mere sanctuaries rather than places of engagement. Sometimes we need refuge from the outside world. Sometimes we need refuge from all the currents and opinions and toxic influences that surround us in the larger society. But we can't hide in our sanctuaries. We can't use them as hiding places. We need to be willing to take some risks, to add the fourth service and discover that it just isn't going to work, and then pull back and figure out why. We need to take the risk to engage with the American Baptist Church down the street. They're the friendliest of the Baptists, I can assure you. We need to figure out how to engage with them and not worry about whether or not we might be rebuffed because of our heresy. We need to figure out how to network with larger groups and communities in the places where we serve without worrying that we will fail and somehow look badly. And we need to learn how to experiment within our own congregations to see how we can deliver our life-saving message in a compelling way for a new generation, recognizing that there will be times when we just don't look very good for our efforts. It's worth failing. They say that if something is worth doing, it's worth doing well. I'm here to tell you that what we're learning about growing congregations is that if something is worth doing, it's worth failing in the effort.
All right. I have some assignments for you now. I would, if I had a magic wand, I would have you pair up with a congregation within driving distance of you. And you know what? It doesn't even need to be a Unitarian Universalist congregation. It could be an American Baptist congregation. And I would like you to do a switch to experience what I have experienced. Go to the community of the other congregation and say, I'm here to be with the UUs in town. What can you tell me about them? And then see how their mission is articulated out in the wider community. Because when I was in congregational life staff, I would travel around, and I would always work with, so in the Pacific Northwest, it's Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. So if I'm going to go work with a congregation, I'm not going for like a one-day workshop. I'm staying the weekend, and we're going to milk it for all it's worth. And so I would come in a little bit early, and I would go to the coffee shops and the bookstores in town, low-hanging fruit. And I would say, I'm working with the UUs. What can you tell me about them? And then I would take down all these notes, and I would reflect that back to the congregation. Now, one congregation, Moscow, Idaho. Anybody here from Moscow, Idaho? They're one of my favorites. They're in a very conservative part of the country. And so I told them I was going to go do this. Word gets around that I do this. And the DRE was the Director of Religious Education was very worried that I would go out by myself and do this. She was worried for my safety. And she was a little bit curious. And she was like, you really don't need to do that here. We're fine. I'm going to do it. Well, first of all, I very rarely have anybody not even know what UU is. Not Unitarians or Unitarian Universalists. I can just say UU, so own that, okay? And very rarely would anybody make a face or say, oh my gosh, why were you doing that? Now, granted, there's that politeness factor there, but I'm in conservative Moscow, Idaho. And I go to the bookstores, and they start telling me about how they're amazed that because their food banks there are stocked with produce because almost everybody in the congregation has a backyard garden so they can contribute. Isn't that amazing? That's so important to them. Another one, oh yeah, my cousin's a UU. She does blah, 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 blah. So this is going on, and I'm writing the stuff down. Somebody new who is Methodist and their kid is gay was appreciative that they started the Oasis Center there in Moscow. So I'm getting all these great things. So I decide I'm going to go into one of the coffee shops is run by All Nations, which is a evangelical, quite fundamental religion there, church there. And Ginger grabs my arm and says, no, you don't want to go in there. It's All Nations. I'm like, oh, I know what I'm doing. And she's getting more and more nervous. She's like, they're going to be hostile towards us. I'm like, psh, whatever, let's go in. So we go in, and I ask, and all the conservative messages all over, although they make it look really hip. I mean, it's an awesome coffee shop there. And so I ask, I am working with the UUs, what can you tell me about them? And one of the other workers whipped around and came over to be part of the conversation, very excitedly said, oh my God, you're so lucky. Get this, their kids learn about all the different religions. So if you want to learn about Buddhism or you want to learn, about Judaism, you go to the UU congregation because they know all that stuff. Isn't that wild? I'm like, okay, that's not what I expected. And then another person came over and said, oh, and go by. Are you going to be with them on Saturday? Because every Saturday night, they move the pews out of the way in their sanctuary, and they dance in the middle of their sanctuary. Can you believe that? And so I invited them to dance on Saturday. So I want you to go try this out at home. What is it who would your community say that you show up for? how would your community express what kind of impact that you make? I mean, we like to know, but what do the people in your wider community say about you? It is worth knowing. Now, Stefan knows, because we've been on enough adventures together, that I won't hesitate in asking people the four questions that lead you to your Congregations and Beyond sweet spot. And by Congregations and Beyond sweet spot, what I mean is, where is the place where you are in dynamic relationship with your wider community? That's your sweet spot. And don't panic, because the beauty of this is I'm not asking you to be anything you aren't, anything you are not. What I'm asking you is to be authentically who you are and show up where your yearning calls you. So here's the four questions, and this is how you do it. As a matter of fact, it's on our blog, Growing Unitarian Universalism. You do a search for that, the blog comes up. Then you write in their sweet spot, and the whole exercise comes up. You can do it with your board. You can do it, I do it all the time. Okay, so big paper, draw a big square, and in the square, you write the questions. What brings you the most joy in your congregation? Where is the joy in your congregation? And the next question is, where is the buzz in your congregation? The stuff that people show up for. So there's got to be some sort of event or some sort of ongoing thing that people are like, yes, let's go there. And then you draw a circle, just like a Venn diagram. I love Venn diagrams. So you draw your Venn diagram, and in the circle that overlaps with the square, which is your congregation, that's your community. And then those questions are, where are the three places that break your heart in the wider community? And then the last question is, where are the buzzy places in your wider community that people show up for and go to? It could be things like the monster truck convention. I get that. It could be things that make us go, what? But there's opportunities there. There's opportunities. So where those overlap is your sweet spot. So here's an example. And if you ever want help finding your sweet spot, I love this stuff. I could do this way into the night. So you just give me a holler and we'll play with the ideas. So Stefan and I don't even remember where we were. Staples, the blue hair woman. Muncie, Indiana.
Her hair was purple and green, not blue.
Her hair was purple and green, not blue.
Clashed with her tattoos.
Clashed with her tattoos. So we're in Muncie at a Staples store. We're doing a conference there, and the woman with the the multicolored hair and tattoos. I asked her. I said, so I'm new to the place. I asked her about the congregation. Oh, by the way, she's Baptist, grew up in the South, conservative, and knew that the congregation was a welcoming congregation. She knew what that meant, and she's been busy with classes, but she's been meaning to go. I'm like, oh, that's cool. I said, okay, so I'm new to the area. Tell me, what are the three most buzzy places in Muncie, Indiana? And she said that, of course, the campus. They've got a university there, the campus. And then there was a bar downtown. That's an opportunity for pints and theology, just saying. There's a bar downtown, and I forget what the Riverside, along the Riverside. And then I asked her, what are the three places that break your heart? Now, that sounds like a rather obscure, how many strangers would come up to you and ask you what breaks your heart? But I have to say, every time I ask it, people seem relieved that I've asked it. We are religious people. Do not shy away from the religious questions. The rest of the world, regardless of what their orientation with ultimate source and all the big religious, what they're with God or whatever, regardless of that, is the big religious questions that we can come and offer. Do not shy away from those. Well, she didn't shy away from the answer. She said the three places that break her heart is the statistics of rape on campus, that women do not feel safe walking across campus. What were some of the others? Oh gosh, I forget those, but that one really stuck out. So we get to working with the congregations in that area, Muncie being one of them, and I went to ask I explained this to the leaders there and said, here's what one of your community members reported. Well, it turns out that they have an active men's group that was looking for something to do, like perhaps escort women after dark on campus. and wear shirts with chalices on them that says, "You are safe with us." That's the Congregations and Beyond sweet spot. Showing up in places that might be unexpected, but showing up being authentically who you are without apology, with an open invitation by what you do, and if you need to, use words.
The woman in Staples was a pretty remarkable person, and it was quite an experience. I will tell you, when Tandi launched in, I wanted to bury my head. I mean, because I'm a kind of a shy guy, and I'm a pretty conventional, graying, middle-aged guy in a suit. And I just wanted to bury my head. I was actually shocked at how much this young woman could tell us about ourselves. And in particular, having spent years trying to come up with the perfect elevator speech, the amazing discovery for me was that actually she was the one who gave us our own elevator speech. We just had to raise the topic. And it was amazing. She practically converted me to Unitarian Universalism in the middle of Staples. Well, I want to wind this up, and then we might have like 5 minutes for a few questions. But I want to wind this up by talking about reasons for optimism. The general landscape for congregations in America is bleak. There are currently about 350,000 congregations of every denomination in this country, and it is likely by the middle of the century that fully half of them will be out of business. I don't think that's true for Unitarian Universalism, and I don't believe that I'm just being naively optimistic here. I'm actually quite confident that what we know is that many people continue to find the need to express their spirituality in the context of community. We are the community folks of American spiritual life. We offer a capacity to serve people, whatever their particular condition, within the context of a meaningful spiritual community, with tremendous flexibility and a great ability to accommodate differing needs and perspectives that most groups would simply hunger for if they weren't just striving to sell a particular product. We meet the social needs and the spiritual needs at the same time. And that gives us a good market position, if you'll forgive the term. It's also true that our tradition is congruent with the temper of the times. We are more journey-driven than we are content-driven. And if we read the polls about what people find wanting with religious communities and pair them up with people's continued expressed needs for some sort of spiritual community, what we discover is that congruence works very well for us. I need to tell you that not everyone, not even a majority of the people, not even an overwhelming majority of the people who call themselves nuns, are Unitarian Universalists who don't know better. But I can tell you that a significant proportion of those who are nuns would actually find our congregations to offer congenial spiritual homes. And that we need to bear in mind that while they are not simply there for our picking, they are there for our winning and for our service. If you were there to the very end of the plenary session this morning when the little lamb, or was it a wolf? It was a puppet, was giving us directions, the little lamb said, "It's better to serve than be served." And I believe that's true. And, I won't sing Bob Dylan for you, but he did suggest we needed to serve somebody, and we're well positioned to be of service to the world. And finally, at its best, our tradition acknowledges authority while empowering each spiritual seeker to judge for themselves. What we do know from studying the nuns and from studying dissatisfied spiritual seekers is that there is still a great yearning in this country to be part of community. There is still a great yearning to explore spiritual questions, but there is somewhere between indifference and overt hostility to those groups who profess to instruct people on what they must know and must believe. We are uniquely positioned to serve people who reflect the temper of the time. The challenge for us is to take that up as a mission and to dedicate ourselves to serving that mission. Tandi has to leave because her middle son is about to jump off the building. That's dedication. I have two limits. I don't jump off buildings and I don't have a permanent tattoo. But otherwise, I love our faith. However, I will linger for a few minutes while...
Well, and I just want, this is actually great modeling because Stefan and I have made it a priority for balanced work, and our family has to come first. So Owen, who is our senior dean of the Youth Caucus, is actually my son, and he's about to jump off a building. Oh my gosh.
Are you taking a couple questions?
Sure.
Okay. For 7 years, I did annual program fund work and got a chance to kind of see directly or indirectly about 60 to 70 congregations in my geography. And I came to some temporary conclusions that perhaps I need you to dispel. 3 variables about growth. 1, quality of the minister. 2, competition, specifically liberal Protestant or liberal Catholic churches nearby that were a lot easier for seekers to join acceptably versus having the courage to, and I believe you have to have a lot of courage to be a UU. And third, the courage of members of UU congregations to be public UUs, not aggressively, but whenever religion came up, to not hide but be willing to say, well, you know, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. Let me give you my point of view. Those 3 variables, how do they relate to growth of congregations?
Let's start with the third. I think that the third variable is significant in terms of our being willing to just be open and to actually risk entering into some uncomfortable conversations with people we love. I try not to discuss politics with my sister, but I'm happy to discuss religion with her. There are other folks in my life I try not to discuss religion with because it creates uncomfortable circumstances. I think we just need to be, simply find ourselves being more open about that. In terms of the second factor, I actually think that healthy liberal competition in the community is good for us because it forces us to hone our message. And it forces us to actually focus in on what our particular mission might actually be. And so I actually think it's a positive thing if there are liberal congregations of other denominations. It means that some people who might otherwise come our way will go to those places. But hey, if we end up living in communities that are dominated by liberal congregations of any denominational stripe, what do we care whether they buy our Kool-Aid or not? So I actually think that that's a positive thing, and I think we try harder when we have some real competition. As for ministers, I actually think that it's the minister-congregation relationship that matters. I have seen some great ministers in my life who would not necessarily strike a short tenured outside observer as being particularly great, but they've built a strong relationship with their congregation, and they are vital spiritual leaders in their congregation, and as a consequence, the congregation and minister together thrive. I think, by and large, ministers and congregations rise or fall together, and that if you're a minister and it's not working well, it's best to look inside. If you're a congregation and it's not working well, instead of wagging a finger at the minister, it's best to look inside at what you're doing as a congregation and see what you might do differently to build a high-quality relationship. It's the relationship more than than one player or the other.
A couple times in General Assembly already, I've heard the phrase in terms of people like us, referring to Unitarian Universalists, and I just have a suggestion to get to where I agree we need to be, which is not a self-identified, white, middle-class, highly educated congregation and denomination. And I would like to challenge everybody to strike that phrase from your vocabulary and not talk about people like us, because it's very exclusionary language.
I mean, you're the one who gets to ask the question, but would it work if we said people who resonate with our values? Does that get,
to be inclusive?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm game for that, actually.
Hi, my name is Sue Lindsley, and I am from the Unitarian Society of New Haven, located in Hamden, Connecticut. This is more of a story than a question. Last fall, with the approval of our Board of Trustees, I ordered and began selling those oval bumper stickers with our initials, USNH, and on the top it gave the entire name of the congregation, Unitarian Society of New Haven, and along the bottom border it gave our website, usnh.org. I asked a fairly nominal purchase price for them, $10, and it would all go to the operating budget. And I thought, innocently and naively, it was a no-brainer. I only ordered 50. I sold about 25. How many do you think are showing up in our parking lot on Sunday morning? 2. And mine is one of them. This is what the responses I got. Oh, I'm afraid of putting that on my car. You know, some people will not take it well. And I actually had one woman who's a very active member of our congregation and a dedicated UU, but she loves to sing, and she sings in an interfaith Baptist choir, gospel singing. She would absolutely not put it on her car because that would invite questions from the other people she was singing with. And she says it's very uncomfortable for her when those people say, "Do you believe in Jesus?" So she was not going to put it on her car. And this goes back to the Dayglow tattoo. Some people don't want to be visible. I thought it would be a great way to be visible in our community without a great deal of expenditure of money or energy on our members' parts. But obviously, I misjudged the clientele.
Two observations.
Yeah.
2 observations and actually a sales pitch. The first observation is that if you have a sticker on your car and people ask you uncomfortable questions, it's working. Whether it's a political sticker, a religious sticker, or some other statement of values, it's working. The second observation I would make is actually we don't need every Unitarian Universalist to be willing to talk to the larger world about their faith. We only need a critical mass of people who are willing to bear witness and to have the bumper sticker on their car. And the third pitch is that from the UUA bookstore, you can buy an oval bumper sticker that says UU. And I'd encourage you to consider it. I'll go so far as to say that if anybody here wants to buy a bumper sticker that says UU, I will pay for it out of my own pocket if you promise to put it on your car.
Hi, thank you for your talk today. I was curious if you've interviewed or looked into any of your work of colleagues of conservative evangelicals in your same position, looking at how their growth compares to past and current and what their projections are for the future. If you compare and what they're doing well and what we can model from that.
Okay, just to give you a thumbnail, and I mean, let's recognize our whole movement is smaller than the number of people that the Southern Baptists baptize every year. So, just to understand our relative size. But I participate on the UUA's behalf in the Cooperative Congregational Studies Partnership, which involves a couple of dozen different denominational groups across the spectrum and consists primarily of data geeks. And it's interesting, the news from mainline and conservative churches is not good. The anxiety level is extraordinarily high because of the magnitude of decline. And in fact, Tandi and I recently published at the Growing UUism blog a comparison over the last 15 years of growth and decline trends for us and other denominational bodies. For the more conservative bodies, which we didn't include in our sample, the numbers are actually even worse. Harvey Cox asserted that fundamentalism is dying. And I remember rebelling at that assertion, but as it turns out, it's not exactly dying, but it is in steep decline in America and in other places. One more, and then they're going to kick us out.
Thank you. Hi. Several years ago, our congregation looked into the Uncommon Denomination campaign, and I wonder if you could speak to that. That was really a strategy. I thought that was maybe evidence-based, that was on the UUA website. In light of what you've talked about today, how would you compare them, and would you recommend it?
I was particularly fond of that campaign, and it got mixed results. There were some people who experienced it as being elitist, some people who experienced it as being negative. For me, it echoed, the Uncola. So I thought from a point of view of sparking conversation and encouraging, thought and attention, that it was very clever, and personally I found it very appealing, and I've discovered that I'm probably in a minority. And in fact, if you can bear with me for just a very short story and a profanity, I remember preaching a sermon in University Chapel where my beloved professor at the time gave me the critique immediately afterward. And he went through the whole list in terms of his assessment of the quality of the sermon. And I was glowing. I mean, he talked, I'm not bragging here because, as you'll find out at the punchline, but he talked about, the technical perfection and how well I used the illustrations and how compelling the illustrations were and how relevant and how closely I followed the text. I mean, he just was glowing, and I was kind of waiting for the A+ and the preaching award. And then he looked at me and he said, "But can you tell us, Stefan, where the F was the good news in that?" And he used the whole word. In a mainline Christian theological school chapel, just to set the full context, to give you a sense of how energized he was. And I thought about it, and it was right. It was an entirely defendable sermon without any good news. I think the most compelling marketing strategy, the most compelling presentation of who we are to the larger world as we move forward and as we recognize the demographic changes, will not be telling people what we're not, but focusing on what life-giving, saving, positive, good news we have to offer. And so I would encourage any outreach strategy to focus primarily on celebrating who we are rather than describing what we're not.